Welcome. My name is Natasha Sherman, and I am your host. And my guest today is Patricia Teffenhart. She is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault, or NJCASA. I've talked to Patricia before, and I think her message and the information she provides for the community is important enough that we have to keep having her back. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So, again, I said jokingly, but not jokingly, we do need to know about this. Not everybody knows about this. So describe a little bit about what NJCASA does,
Sure.
and then specifically what your mission is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the New Jersey Coalition Against Sexual Assault works with, sort of to put it in normal language, every county has a nonprofit organization that works with sexual assault survivors and also works to prevent sexual violence from occurring in their communities. So every county in New Jersey has such an organization. So we work with each of those 21 county-based organizations, and then we have the added pleasure of having the Rutgers University Office of Violence Prevention and Victim Assistance as part of our membership as well. So that's the main part of our coalition, that's our membership. And so the work that we do at the statewide level is really taking the voices from those local organizations and the perspectives and the experiences, what they're experiencing as far as trends and who's coming forward, who's not coming forward, what are the barriers that they're experiencing. We take those experiences and those stories that we're hearing from the local level and we elevate them up to the statewide discourse.
Yeah, and it's really vital because you have to have this connection, somebody who's in the game, who represents all these other organizations, and then who can make a difference legally. And I listened to a radio interview of you recently, and you talked about how some of the things that you hear when you go to legislators that are so arcane in the way they think about things, and we're kind of shocked. Yeah. So your job is also to educate them.
Yes, so much of our job is about education. Education for policymakers, for media, for other service providers to understand where there might be intersections between the work that's their priority focus area and ours. We're really, so much of what we do is just providing basic information so that people can make sound, responsible decisions based off of facts rather than sort of what's transpired through the social narrative that is often inaccurate.
So let's talk about the social narrative.
Yeah.
I'm always shocked. I think we're evolving some of the time, and but I start seeing the subtle nuances of women being victimized. And I think women need to be educated as well because they've bought into the view of themselves. And I remember recently seeing something, and this may seem bizarre as an example, but someone on television who was all glammed up. And I like glam, but and her boobs exposed, and it's like all of that. And they brought in this young group of girls with braces, 6th or 7th grade, and this famous personality, says, "I'm all about girl power," and I thought, how is that a reflection of girl power? Like girl power based on my boobs showing, my makeup perfect, my hair perfect. I mean, there's something about that.
So I think we've had this we've touched upon this conversation before. And I love an opportunity to have this conversation because I think we can even talk about sort of the generational differences in a feminist perspective.
Yes.
That's a huge part of like the discourse that's going on right now between like feminist advocates. And I think that I come from, as do most of the people on our staff at the coalition, the feminist philosophy that says women can and should wear whatever they want to wear, and they should be honored and respected for their minds. And if I feel comfortable exposing more of my skin or more of my body, that doesn't make me less valued or less valuable or less of a role model. And that the real issue is where we're focusing our attention. We weren't focusing our attention on the beautiful mind that this person has. We were focusing our attention on her physical being, but we don't do the same thing of men.
I think to a degree we do in a different way. And I really want to correct myself. I think women should dress the way they want and, whatever it is. Somehow in the media, it gets translated as this is the most important thing about you.
Yep.
And that's what I kind of resent or get suspect of.
Yeah, and so I think in the instance that you described, then I think the real focus is on why is the media focusing on that rather than the message that's being delivered. And that's very similar to when you tie it back to the work that we do at the Coalition around Sexual Violence Prevention, or even working specifically with survivors. So often the first things that are said to a survivor, well, why were you wearing that? Why were you there? Why were you hanging out with those people? So it's often the blame of the individual who's having really egregious crimes committed against them. And that narrative is sort of being perpetuated all over the place.
In more subtle and more subtle ways. So you think you've got, you're open-minded, and then you get slammed with another subtlety. And it's like, wait a minute, how am I thinking?
Yeah.
And I think when you talked about, we need to educate, I think that's it. I mean, open discussion, like challenging each other. Like, what does that reflect? I mean, why shouldn't she be able to dress like that,
Right.
But I think also we need to educate, and I think you do have that, this kind of media awareness. Like, what is the message being portrayed? And do you really relate to that?
Yeah.
And then, kind of having everybody examine what they're buying into automatically.
Yeah, and we started this conversation talking about that radio interview that you heard, and I think that the other thing that's really interesting when you tie all of this together, and you brilliantly talked about, there's the things that are going on behind the scenes that people aren't even aware of. And so there's also, when we're doing our work at the coalition level around policy making, often what will happen is the public will see the final vote. So they'll see and celebrate, as they should, that their policymakers and their legislators voted affirming increased access for survivors' rights. That they have made strong public positions around, anti-sexual violence work or appropriations or policymaking. And so much of the work that we do has to do with behind-the-scenes education that no one else sees.
Like
how long will it take us to get a bill posted to be heard in committee, because we have to deal with and work through all of the social norms that might lead a legislator to say, well, why would we need to provide this for survivors? Why are survivors looking for this? Why are they getting, why are they being victimized to begin with? Why are we not pointing the finger at them? And so we take a lot of time providing statistics, really taking a look at what's going on nationally across the country, where other states have passed legislation that supports survivors and really benefiting from some of the arguments that they've been able to make to support our cause and our mission. And so at the end of the day, what the public might see is how awesome we passed this bill. And we do feel victorious every time we're able to increase access to justice. But we're also really reminded every time we take a step through that process how much work we still have to do. Because we're all part of that same social fabric. Regardless of what role we play, whether we're in the media or we're a teacher or we're a parent or we're a policymaker, we're all being influenced by these same norms.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I don't know if it was just about college, on college campuses or just universally, that I think it was universally that only 2% are actually prosecuted and only maybe 30% are actually reported. So there are a lot of criminals walking around out there who can commit the same crime again and not even see it as a crime.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I think that's it is, and also it's important to note that the FBI recognizes rape as being the second most violent crime. The first most violent crime is murder.
And next to that is rape.
Yes. And so we're talking about, a crime that's committed against an individual and then they live in their crime scene. Oftentimes survivors don't come forward because they, to your point, have been groomed to not see that it is having been a crime committed against them, or they know their perpetrator. We're still...
And imagine having to function inside of that social structure wherever they are and see their perpetrator.
Well, and I think that's the thing, right? We're really conditioned. So much of our education is about walk in groups, carry your mace, be wary of the stranger. But 75 to 80% of sexual assaults are committed against people by someone they know. They're not strangers. So
I think that makes it more difficult.
Yes, absolutely. Because you're protecting yourself against someone that you've already built up a trust and a rapport with. It seems counter to like authentic relationship building.
And I think it probably also, if you're in a particular social circle, you don't want to impact that and lose all of that. And then I think it's easier to doubt yourself when it's someone you knew. And I heard you say, at any point along the way, you should be allowed to say no.
Yes.
And just an absence of no doesn't mean you can progress, that you need to check in.
Yeah.
And so I think women doubt themselves as well. Like, was it really? Should I? Could I have?
So the question is, why do we doubt ourselves? Because we've been conditioned to doubt ourselves. We've been conditioned to be passive. We've been conditioned to be subordinate or quiet or permissive. And so I think all of that, I don't think that we innately or we're born feeling as if we're doubting those things, but we've been socialized to doubt it.
And I hate to extrapolate, but it's, I kind of live in the realm of I get to create my reality, create my experiences, intentional. I'm a coach. So, and I don't fall into a lot of the negative diatribe about anything because it doesn't serve me to do it.
Right.
But as just you hear snippets of news of where women are stoned to death, women are, there's cut, their genitalia are cut. Women are, again, punished for crimes of their men and or punished for crimes perpetrated on them. And if I put it all together, it could easily send me into, insanity. I mean, really.
Yeah. We've got a lot of work to do. And I think what's interesting is it's very easy for us to look at all these different scenarios and say it's someone else's responsibility. It's happening in other countries or it's happening in another community, but it's happening everywhere.
And it's part of the same thing.
Yep.
It just gets, created differently and different actions are taken, but it's part of that same mentality.
Yeah.
And to me, it's like unfathomable. Like, what would allow somebody to think that that's okay?
Right.
And I think you in one of your interviews said it's about power.
Right. So sexual assault is never about sex. It's always about power and control. And then when we think about how that plays out in gender norms, how we, groom boys and men and women and girls, all of those things, saying that you're a coach is actually a really important piece because it implies a level of intentionality in all of your actions. But a lot of us don't have the time to be intentional, and certainly there is no
We're not trained.
Yeah, there's no great guidebook on how to be the most intentional adult or caring parent, and most of us are kind of making it up as we go. But also, as a result of that, sometimes we're making some mistakes, not intentionally, and certainly not with harmful intentions. But they start to be compounded. They start with the messages that we're providing to children in our lives, and then they hear those same messages repeated through the media or through the school bus, discourse, and then it all sort of snowballs out of control, and you end up in these situations where women are doubting whether or not they created a scenario. And we're really confident and strong in our statements that say the only person who is responsible for stopping a sexual assault is the person who's thinking about committing it. And when you can deliver that message to a woman and affirm the fact that she isn't responsible for the crimes that have been committed against her, you can start to make some progress.
Yeah. I think, and one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is when people are married, and then they come forward and say, my husband raped me. And the immediate thinking is, hey, it's your husband.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that.
Oh, man, you like to get into the juicy topics of this work. You don't make it easy for me at all. And I love it. So I think that's a really important thing. I mean, I'm pretty sure, don't hold me to this, but I think there are still states in this country that say that marital rape is not an actual thing.
I would imagine that's the case.
Yes. And so, again, it comes back
But even if it's not the law, I think women think marital rape doesn't exist.
I would argue that also men think it doesn't exist.
Oh, right. Exactly, yes.
So I think that's a really great example of, a marriage is nothing more than like a legal construct. It's a piece of paper that pairs two people together and you're sharing assets and whatever else. But it doesn't give anyone decision-making authority over my body and my being. And it kind of goes back to what you had mentioned before about the absence of a no does not equal yes. And so if we can talk about that way before people are even married, if we could talk about that even with children as they're growing up, and if I'm tickling my son and he tells me to stop, if I honor that and stop, then I'm teaching him that when someone says no, I respect it, as should you. And then that kind of carries forward. And so the same kind of thing could happen if you fast forward a number of years and now you're in a marital relationship and the one partner says, like, I don't want to anymore. If you've built that foundation of respect and listening to your partner's desires and wishes and they say no, then you stop. But the instances of it happening in a marital relationship versus any other relationship, I think the parameters are still the same. It's still someone thinking that what you have, which is your body, is mine for the taking, and I'm just going to take it.
And and it's so, again, pervasive. I think that when people, I know in some churches, I think it was the Catholic Church where they have pre-Cana, I don't know if they do that anymore, but lessons, kind of premarital counseling.
Yeah.
And I think it would be so useful, besides discussing money, is like, what are your expectations sexually? Do you think that every time he wants sex, you're supposed to say yes, and vice versa? And then what if she says no, or what if he says no? What does it mean? And kind of creating those agreements ahead of time, because we are unconscious about that. I know in my marriage, nothing violent ever happened or anything like that, but internally, what I had internalized was, you really shouldn't ever say no.
Right.
Like somehow you owe your body to that person, which is really like...
Well, I think what's interesting too, in order to even get to that conversation, would be for us as a society to shift our comfort level and actually talking about sex at all.
Yes.
Right? So I know I keep bringing this back to the most foundational parts of like grooming young people. But if we're telling a young person that a nose is a nose and an eye is an eye and an elbow is an elbow, but we're giving fake names to other parts of our anatomy because we have a level of discomfort using the real anatomically appropriate words, then we're already placing young people at a disadvantage to say, no, I don't want you to touch my vagina. No, I don't want you to engage in an act that involves these two body parts. And so I can imagine even, I love the idea of thinking about two people about to be in a committed relationship talking about this. And even at no matter what age that is, it's really likely that we're going to find that they're talking two different languages.
Yes.
Because they've been taught different words for those parts of their body.
Yes.
So we have to have a comfort level of talking about sex. We have to have a comfort level of talking about respect and physical autonomy. Caring for each other.
Autonomy.
Right.
Oh my God.
I mean, these are like, we could be here all day
Yes.
talking about all of these things, and all of these intersections all play into what we talk about. Those of us that do this work, we talk about rape culture and our inability to engage in these substantive, meaningful conversations, even at a young age. You're not talking about rape and sexual violence, but you're talking about respect and boundaries and listening to both with your ears but with your eyes. If you see that someone seems physically uncomfortable with what's going on, stop. But we're not there yet. When we're talking about sexual violence, so much of what we experience is everyone saying, what are you doing about it? What are you doing about it? What is everybody else doing about it? But the real hard truth is we all have something to be doing about it. And that requires a level of self-reflection that is very challenging to endure.
Yes. And there was a question that slipped by. But I wanted to... there was something in the radio, in Tinder. Let's
Yes.
talk about Tinder.
Yeah.
Now explain what Tinder is, because I just found out recently.
So I am not on Tinder. I have to be very clear about that. I do have a husband who would probably be very distressed if I said, well, on my Tinder account, these things happen.
Okay, so what is Tinder?
So Tinder is a dating app, and it's like a social network where you, if you're single, or I guess not single, if you're looking to date, and you put
to date or have sex?
It's billed as a dating app. It is a dating app, a place where you could go and look for people that you might want to meet, and they have profiles, and you can read some information about them, and obviously there's pictures, and so it's a really interesting kind of conversation, because Tinder pops up when people are talking about, well, you don't know who you're meeting on the internet, or you don't know who you're meeting on these apps, and that kind of ties back to really what's happening is by the time most people are physically meeting up with someone that they've met on Tinder, for example, they're not really perceived as strangers anymore.
Right, you've been like pen pals.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah. So this is someone you've been perhaps texting with. Maybe you've had multiple phone calls with them. Maybe you've Facebooked with them. I mean, you feel as if this person is now someone trusted, and you've maybe you shared some intimate things with them. And so when you're meeting with them physically, oftentimes they're no longer a stranger. Right. And so I think that people want to say that that's another like stranger danger, high alert, but it's not. These are people.
Or you put yourself in that situation.
Yes, right.
But if you met someone at a bar or a party or whatever, it's a meeting, and then you engage in a particular way, and then you decide whether you want to connect further.
That's
so you're
right.
saying it's basically the same thing.
It is. And what's so interesting about what you just said is that's the same thing that's being told to victims and survivors is, well, why would you have met up with someone? But that's the same narrative that we're still asking of people who met people at bars or met people at a party or met someone in class. The finger's always being pointed to the person that is victimized. And this is the rare crime where that actually happens. Most crimes that are committed against people, I shared in the radio interview that I was a victim of a crime. I was mugged at knife point. And at no point when I called the police did someone say, prove to me that this crime happened to you.
Or did you leave your bag flinging open?
Are you sure you didn't just, use your credit cards to go buy a bunch of things and now you're trying to get out of it?
Right. But it's a really great example.
And my experience was so
being taken care of and believed.
Yes. I felt as if the system respected me, honored me, and would do everything that it could to protect me.
Until it's a sex crime.
Yes. Very rarely do victims of crime have to prove that a crime was committed against them before this system acts responsibly. And sexual assault is one of those rare instances where the victim is often on trial way before and way longer than the perpetrator would be.
So, we've all watched those programs that tell us that, and we're shocked, and oh my God, the poor girl, she's being slandered, and, her whole sexual history is, being laid out there, and we have empathy, and yet it continues to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the real answer is I think that people have to be able to do this self-reflective work to figure out how do we rebuild a societal fabric that doesn't perpetuate that.
Yeah.
And that's hard. It's not easy.
It's interesting. I was just thinking, that whole just say no, which was, flawed and didn't work. But,
right.
But it's kind of, just keep your hands off of me.
Yeah.
Keep your hands to yourself.
Right.
It's like until I give you permission. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Well, and what's so interesting about that is so often people will say, I have a young daughter who's getting ready to go off to college. What do I need to do? And very rarely do we get asked, what do I need to do for my young boy who's going off to college?
Yeah.
But the real answer would be to flip what you just said, would be to say, here's what your son needs to know when going off to college. And have you taught them to respect people when they say no? Have you taught them physical boundaries? Have you taught them to seek consent? Do they know what consent is?
But very often in the homes, there aren't any physical boundaries. So,
yeah.
So somewhere they've got to get educated about this.
Which goes back to there's no one easy answer. It's very, New Jersey should be proud. We have sexual violence prevention programs in 20 of our 21 counties.
That's right.
They're in grades, like middle school and high school. And we actually, to bring the conversation full circle, a lot of our focus is on media literacy and how does the media perpetuate gender inequity? How does it perpetuate rape culture? And if you can dissect media, then you can also rebut media and what media is telling you is normal or appropriate. But so often people will say, well, what are they doing in the schools? And then you'll give them that answer. Well, then what are they doing in the colleges? And then you'll give them that answer. But if you turn the question around and say, well, what are you doing in your home? Or what are you doing in your community? It's much harder to answer that question. Because we've all been, again, groomed and socialized with these same norms and pervasive feelings around masculinity and femininity and what it means to be in a relationship and all of these things. We're all a product of it.
Sure. And you know, one of them that comes to mind, and I was just thinking about media literacy. I mean, my God, if we developed any media literacy, we wouldn't be buying all that crap that they're telling us to buy, you know, and the drugs and the this and the that, you know, it's kind of, we'd be living our lives. I saw this thing once where the purpose of life is to buy and consume products. And so it kind of is, that's what they're telling us, you know. So we're brainwashed, and it's really, you know, I challenge people to kind of think, why am I reaching for this? Like, what's the motivation? Is it me who really desires it? Or is it some voice in the back of my head that's told me I should desire this, you know? And what's the end result
and
here?
Can you discern the difference anymore?
Yes. Most of us can't.
Yeah.
I was saying in a class of mine recently, I said, you know, we all have Stockholm syndrome. I mean, we've been co-opted to believe that we need all these things, and we're on their side now. We need all these things. So it's, you know, it's again, this is a very specific area, but I think people really just need to be challenged to start dismantling their belief systems and really examining, what is it that I really want? I mean, you know, it can be simplified, much more simplified than it is now, because most people, it's just, oh, it's cool, it's this, and you know.
So even the songs that we listen to sort of play into that. So
we have 1 minute.
Oh, so I think that, you know, the important, wow, God, that went fast. So I think the important thing to think about is going back to a level of intentionality and being aware of what we're consuming, what we're repeating, what we're sharing on social media.
What ideas we're consuming.
And then think about if our sons or daughters or young people in our lives were to share those same messages, how would we feel about that? And to start modeling by example could be a really basic place for all of us to start.
And on that note, we have to end. Thank you so much for being here again, and of course, we'll have you back.
Thank you so much.
My name is Natasha Sherman. Thank you for joining us.